what are the prospects for South Asia as a region? I mean, you've studied South Asia, you've worked on many countries in the region, uh, as well as a region as a whole. South Asia, apart from Sri Lanka, almost all the South Asian countries are going to experience this demographic dividend you talked about, and there are many. South Asia is integrating more with the world. Services trade is going to be another factor that boosts South Asia, but still we know that there are many issues with the region. What's your take on the trajectory, growth trajectory for South Asia as a region, and also its place in this changing global economic landscape?
Anushka, if you'd asked me this question 4 or 5 years back, I'd have said the potential is great and the prospects are even better, because we really could think of ending poverty within a generation with the kind of rapid growth rates that we were seeing, not just in India but also amongst all its neighbors. After the global financial crisis and I think some of the fragilities that exposed, it's brought home to many of us that unless you get the fundamentals right, and here I'm referring basically to two things. One is South Asia remains the least integrated region trade-wise in the world, which is absurd given the commonality of culture, of language, of history, of even the colonial power that ruled in this area. So that has to change. And it has to change by some very micro policy changes, how borders are manned, how cross-border trade takes place, the kind of difficulties that people face with goods traveling from one country to another across borders, to greater foreign investment amongst each other, greater trust, which obviously is not something you can build overnight, but an ingredient in trust building is precisely commerce and shared objectives of growth. So I think trade remains a very important area where the countries can benefit really, and there the neighbors India have a lot to benefit from the very large market in India in terms of selling their goods, and at the same time inviting foreign direct investment from India into the neighboring countries. The second area really is in terms of sharing natural resources, and the biggest thing that stares you in the face, of course, is the water resources between Nepal, India, Bangladesh, Bhutan, and the hydropower opportunities that exist, as well as the transport and other kinds of logistics opportunities that exist. And I think that's a major area that needs work, that we have not been able to crack as much as we thought we would. I think there are now movements in that direction. People are beginning to realize the shared nature of their future. But each country has political compulsions that draw away most of the energy of the political leadership. And while that's never going to change, I think increasingly we have to think about the shared future that South Asia must have. It is the largest concentration of poor people in the world. If we're going to tackle global poverty, yes, Africa is going to have to change, but really with that large concentration of poor people in South Asia, this is where the real changes will have to happen. And we're not talking of just a few million, we're talking of hundreds of million here.
A big part of this, addressing this challenge, is going to be raising the level of debate and discussion on these issues at a pan-South Asian level, whether it is by think tanks like the IPS and NCAER, or civil society, or governments, academia. But when we look at our region compared to maybe ASEAN, where the level of debate on these issues is intense, the level of feeding in of the debate into policy is also more intense than our region. We have initiatives like the South Asia Economic Summit. We have the World Economic Forum on India that's taking place towards the end of this year as well. And then of course we have SARC. So in your opinion on these, whether it's track 1 or track 2, where is this debate going to happen? Where is, what is your take on the future of SARC as a mechanism to drive these kind of issues and tackle them at a regional level?
I think it's going to have to happen at all the levels that you mentioned. If we just left it to SARC, we would be bound by all the constraints, the political constraints that SARC as a multilateral organization faces, with veto power by any of the states, and the need to come to always consensus. So I think it has to happen at the level of think tanks like yours and mine. It has to happen at the level of citizens. It has to happen at the level of even tourism, travel between our countries. And commercial links. It's those sorts of things that are going to transform the landscape. Around that discussion, debate that you mentioned clearly is very helpful. There are instances where non-governmental entities have been looking at, for example, the issue of upper riparian rights, lower riparian rights, the whole issue of water sharing in the Ganges and Brahmaputra plains. It's these kinds of initiatives that are going to fundamentally push governments to become much more accountable for results to their citizens, and that I think is badly needed.